my wife said. From now on, you have no right over my body. If you want to touch me, you ask for permission. I said, my voice cold. If you want boundaries, here's the ultimate one. What happened next will shock you. Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Vernon from Sri Lanka. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. I came home that night like I always did, tired from work, my tie loose around my neck. The house smelled like pasta and garlic, and I figured Sarah had cooked something nice. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and called out, "Hey, I'm home." She didn't answer right away, which wasn't normal. Usually, she'd poke her head out from the kitchen or say something quick, like, "Dinner's almost ready." But that night, she stayed quiet. I found her in the living room, sitting on the couch, her arms crossed, staring at the coffee table like it had done something wrong. "Hey," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "What's up?" She looked up at me, and her eyes were sharp, like knives. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something I didn't like. I sat down across from her, my stomach twisting. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it wasn't good. "Daniel," she said, leaning forward, "from now on, you have no right over my body. If you want to touch me, you ask for permission." I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. No right over her body. What did that even mean? We were married. 8 years. We'd shared everything. Our bed, our dreams, our fights. And now she was telling me I needed permission to touch her? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was she saying I'd done something wrong? Was she saying I wasn't her husband anymore? I stared at her, my mouth dry. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" I finally managed to say. "I mean what I said," she replied, her voice still steady, but her eyes were hard now, like she'd made up her mind. "I need boundaries. I need you to respect me. Respect you." I snapped, my voice louder than I meant it to be. "I've always respected you. I work hard for us, for this house, for everything. And now you're telling me I'm not allowed to touch you? Like I'm some stranger?" "It's not like that," she said, but I wasn't listening anymore. My head was spinning. I thought about her new friends, the women from that book club she'd joined a few months ago. They were always talking about feminism, about rights, about men being the problem. I'd laughed it off at first, but now I saw it clear as day. They'd gotten to her. They'd poisoned her against me. "Those friends of yours," I said, my voice shaking. "They put this in your head, didn't they? They're telling you I'm the bad guy." "Daniel, this isn't about them," she said, but I didn't believe her. I couldn't. I stood up, pacing the room, my hands clenched into fists. 8 years, Sarah. 8 years, and now you're drawing lines? You think I'm just gonna sit here and take this?" She didn't say anything, just watched me, her face tight. I wanted her to fight back, to yell, to do something, but she didn't. And that made it worse. I went to bed that night, but I didn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. No right over her body. Permission. It felt like she'd ripped something out of me, something I couldn't name. I thought about all the times I'd felt unappreciated, all the times I'd come home tired and she'd been distant. I thought about how hard I'd tried to be a good husband, and now she was telling me it wasn't enough. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't live like this, with her drawing lines, with her new friends whispering in her ear. I needed to take control, to show her I wouldn't be pushed around. I printed the divorce papers from my computer, my hands shaking as I signed my name. When she came downstairs, I handed them to her. "If you want boundaries," I said, my voice cold, "here's the ultimate one." Her eyes widened, and for a second, I saw something break in her face. "Daniel, wait," she said, her voice cracking. "This isn't what I meant. Let's talk." But I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her explanations. I turned away, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. I thought I'd feel better, but as I drove to work, my chest felt tight, like something heavy was sitting on it. I told myself I'd done the right thing. She'd regret this. She'd see what she'd lost. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I thought I'd feel better after handing Sarah the divorce papers. I thought I'd feel free, like I'd taken control of my life again. But that tightness in my chest didn't go away. It followed me to work, sitting heavy on me like a rock. I tried to focus on my spreadsheets, my emails, my coffee breaks, but my mind kept drifting back to her face. The way her eyes had widened, the way her voice had cracked when she said, "This isn't what I meant." I pushed it down, told myself I didn't care. She brought this on herself. She'd drawn the line, not me. That night, I came home to an empty house. Her stuff was still there, her books on the shelf, her mug on the counter, but she wasn't. I figured she'd gone to stay with one of her book club friends, probably Mia, the one who always looked at me like I was the enemy. I didn't care. Let her go. Let her see how hard life was without me. I needed to make sure she understood, though. She couldn't just walk away and think she'd won. So, I did what I had to do. I logged into our bank account and blocked her access to the credit cards. It was easy. Just a few clicks, and she was cut off. I told myself it was fair. Those cards were in my name, paid for with my money. She wanted boundaries? Fine. She could have them. Then I called Mark, my buddy from college who ran the company where Sarah did her freelance work. I'd gotten her that gig, pulled strings to make sure she had something steady. Now, I needed him to pull her out. "Hey, man," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Sarah's been unreliable lately. Missing deadlines, getting distracted. You might want to let her go." Mark hesitated. "You sure, Dan? She's been fine, as far as I know." "Trust me," I said, leaning into the lie. "She's not worth the trouble." He sighed, but I knew he'd do it. Mark owed me one, and I wasn't above cashing in. By the end of the call, he'd agreed to terminate her contract. I hung up, feeling a rush of power. I'd taken back control. She'd regret this. She'd see what she'd lost. But that rush didn't last. The next day, I started noticing things. My phone buzzed with texts from mutual friends, people we'd known for years. "Hey, Dan, what's going on with Sarah?" one said. "She called me, said you blocked her cards." "That's harsh, man," said another. I ignored them. They didn't understand. They didn't know how she'd humiliated me, how she'd drawn that line. At work, Mark avoided me. He didn't say anything, but I could tell he wasn't happy. I overheard him talking to someone in the break room, saying, "I didn't sign up to ruin someone's life." I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my mouth. Ruin someone's life? Was that what he thought I was doing? I wanted to march over there, tell him he didn't know the whole story, but I didn't. I just stood there, feeling like the ground was shifting under me. That night, I went out with my buddies, hoping to shake off the guilt. We grabbed beers at our usual spot, and I told them everything. "She thinks she can just change the rules," I said, slamming my glass on the table. Well, I showed her. "She's got nothing now." But they didn't cheer me on like I expected. Tom, my oldest friend, looked at me funny. "Dan, I get that you're pissed," he said, "but blocking her cards? Getting her fired? That's a lot, man. A lot." I snapped. "She humiliated me, Tom. She told me I needed permission to touch her, like I'm some creep. She doesn't get to do that and walk away clean." "Maybe she just wanted respect," Tom said quietly. I didn't want to hear it. I finished my beer and left, my head pounding. Respect? She wanted respect, and I wanted my wife back, the one who didn't draw lines, the one who didn't look at me like I was the problem. When I got home, the house felt emptier than ever. I sat on the couch, staring at the spot where she'd sat that night, where she'd said those words. I thought I'd feel better by now, but I didn't. I felt worse. My phone buzzed again, another text, this time from my sister. "Dan, what the hell? Sarah's staying with Mia, and she's a mess. You need to fix this." Fix this? I didn't even know where to start. I tried to ignore how worse I was feeling, told myself I'd done the right thing. She'd drawn the line, not me. She'd humiliated me, and now she was paying the price. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more it felt like a lie. At work, things started falling apart. Mark wouldn't even look at me anymore. I'd see him in the hallway, and he'd turn the other way, like I was someone he didn't want to know. One day, I caught him in the break room, pouring coffee, and I tried to act normal. "Hey, man," I said, forcing a smile. "You good?" He didn't smile back. "Dan, I didn't sign up to ruin someone's life," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You told me Sarah was unreliable, but I checked. She wasn't. You just wanted her gone." I froze, my coffee cup burning my hand. "What are you talking about?" I said, but my voice sounded weak. even to me. You used me, he said, stepping closer. And now I've got to live with that. But you? You've got to live with worse. He walked out, leaving me standing there, my face hot. Ruin someone's life? That wasn't what I'd meant to do. I just wanted her to see, to understand. But now, hearing Mark say it like that, it hit me different. I tried to shake it off, told myself he was overreacting, but the words stuck, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. It didn't stop there. At lunch, I overheard two guys from accounting talking in the cafeteria. Did you hear about Dan? One said. Yeah, blocked his wife's cards, got her fired. Messed up, man, the other said. I sat there, my sandwich halfway to my mouth, feeling like everyone was staring at me. They weren't, but it felt like they were. My reputation, the guy everyone liked, the guy who had it together, it was slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop it. That night, I went to my parents' house, hoping for some support. My mom opened the door, her face tight, like she already knew. Daniel, she said, pulling me into a hug, but it felt stiff. My dad was in the living room, watching TV, but he didn't get up. Dan, what's this I hear about Sarah? My mom said, sitting me down. Your sister called, said you blocked her cards, got her fired. Is that true? She started it. I said, my voice loud, defensive. She told me I needed permission to touch her, like I'm some creep. She humiliated me, Mom. I had to do something. My dad looked at me, his eyes hard. Doing something doesn't mean destroying her life, son, he said. You're better than that. Or at least, I thought you were. I stared at him, my chest tight. You're taking her side? I said, standing up. After everything I've done for her? For us. We're not taking sides, my mom said, her voice soft but firm. But what you did, Daniel, it's not right. You need to fix this. I left, my hands shaking as I drove home. Fix this. Everyone kept saying that, but how? I didn't even know where to start. That night, I had a dream. Sarah was standing in the living room, her face pale, her eyes wide, like they were when I handed her the divorce papers. Why? She said, her voice breaking. Why did you do this? I tried to answer, but my voice wouldn't come out. I woke up sweating, my heart pounding. The image of her face burned into my head. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just a dream, but it wouldn't leave me. I started seeing her everywhere, in the empty chair at the dining table, in the shadows on the walls. I'd hear her voice, soft and cracked, saying, this isn't what I meant. I'd turn, expecting to see her, but she was never there. I told myself I was fine, that I'd done the right thing. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. My friends were pulling away. My family was disappointed, and Mark wouldn't even talk to me. I was alone, and it was starting to feel like I'd made a mistake. But I wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. It was like Sarah's ghost was following me everywhere. I'd see her face in my dreams, hear her voice in my head, and every time, it made me feel worse. I told myself I'd done the right thing, that she'd started this, but it wasn't working anymore. The guilt was there, gnawing at me, and I didn't know how to make it stop. Then, one day, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Sarah. We need to talk, it said. Meet me at the coffee shop on 3rd Street tomorrow at 2. Please. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Talk? After everything I'd done, blocking her cards, getting her fired, she wanted to talk? I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to delete the message and pretend I hadn't seen it. But another part, the part that couldn't stop seeing her face, wanted to go. I didn't reply, but I knew I'd show up. The next day, I got to the coffee shop early. It was a small place with wooden tables and the smell of coffee in the air. I sat by the window, my hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't touched. I kept looking at the door, waiting. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked different, tired, but stronger, like she'd been through something and come out the other side. She saw me, gave a small nod, and sat down across from me. Daniel, she said, her voice calm but firm. I'm not here to fight. I just need to say some things. I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't trust myself to speak. She took a deep breath, and then she started. What you did hurt me, she said, looking me in the eye. Blocking my cards, getting me fired, that wasn't just about boundaries. That was about control. You wanted to punish me, and you did. But I'm not here to beg for forgiveness or to ask you to fix it. I'm here because I need closure. I stared at her, my mind racing. Punish her? That wasn't what I'd meant to do. Or was it? I opened my mouth to argue, but she held up a hand, stopping me. Let me finish, she said. I know I wasn't perfect. I didn't explain myself well that night. I wanted respect, not revenge. I wanted you to see me as a person, not just your wife. But I didn't know how to say it, and you didn't know how to listen. We both failed, Daniel. But what you did after, that was on you. Her words hit me like a punch. I wanted to yell, to tell her she was wrong, that she'd humiliated me first. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew she was right. I'd wanted to hurt her, to make her feel small, because that's how she'd made me feel. And now, looking at her, I saw what I'd done. I'm moving on, she said, her voice steady. I've got a new place, new work. I'm building my life again. But I needed to say this for me. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, Daniel. But it won't be with me. She stood up, gave me one last look, and walked out. I sat there, staring at the empty chair, my coffee cold. Her words echoed in my head, over and over. Control, punishment, failure. I wanted to chase after her, to explain, to fix it, but I knew I couldn't. She was gone, and I'd pushed her away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the meeting, her words, her face. I thought about everything, blocking her cards, getting her fired, handing her the divorce papers. I told myself it was fair, that she'd started it, but now I wasn't so sure. I'd hurt her, bad, and for what? To feel strong? To feel in control? It hadn't worked. I felt worse than ever. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called a therapist. I didn't know what else to do, but I knew I couldn't keep going like this. The guilt, the dreams, the emptiness, it was too much. I needed help, and I needed it now. As I sat there, waiting for the first session, I wondered what Sarah was doing. Was she happy? Was she free? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I wasn't. I thought therapy would be easy. I thought I'd sit down, talk for an hour, and walk out feeling better. But it wasn't like that. The first session, I just sat there, staring at the therapist, Dr. Ellis, a guy with glasses and a calm voice. He asked me why I was there, and I didn't know where to start. I messed up, I said finally, my voice rough. I hurt my wife, and now everything's falling apart. He nodded, like he'd heard it before, and asked me to explain. So I did. I told him about Sarah, about that night she drew the line, about the divorce papers, about blocking her cards and getting her fired. I told him about the coffee shop, her words, how she'd looked at me like I was someone she didn't know. I thought he'd judge me, call me a monster, but he didn't. He just listened, and that made it worse. Why do you think you did those things? He asked, his voice steady. I didn't have an answer, not at first. She humiliated me, I said, my hands clenched. She told me I needed permission to touch her, like I was some creep. I had to do something. He nodded again, but then he said, "It sounds like you felt powerless. Like her words took something from you. So you tried to take something back." I stared at him, my chest tight. Powerless. That word hit me hard. I'd never thought of it like that, but he was right. That night, when she drew the line, I'd felt small, like I wasn't enough. And everything I did after, the cards, the job, the divorce papers, it was all to feel big again, to feel in control. But it hadn't worked. It had just made everything worse. That session stuck with me. I kept hearing his words, over and over. Powerless. Control. I started seeing things different. I thought about Sarah, about how she must have felt when I blocked her cards, when I got her fired. I thought about her moving on, building a new life, and me, stuck here, alone in this empty house. I didn't like what I saw in the mirror anymore. Then, one day it got worse. I got a letter in the mail from Sarah's lawyer. I opened it, my hand shaking, and read the words. Financial control, it said. Interference with employment. They were talking about legal action, saying I'd crossed a line, that I could be in trouble. I sat there, staring at the paper, my heart pounding. Legal action? I hadn't thought it would come to this. I just wanted her to see, to understand, but now it was bigger than me. I called Mark, hoping he'd help, but he didn't answer. I went to work, tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't even look at me. I'm done, Dan, he said, walking away. You're on your own. I stood there, feeling like the ground was falling out from under me. My friends, my family, my job, everything was slipping away, and it was my fault. That night, I had another dream. Sarah was there again, but this time, she wasn't crying. She was standing tall, looking at me, her eyes steady. "You chose this," she said, her voice clear. "You chose control, not me." I woke up sweating, my heart racing, her words echoing in my head. "You chose this." I went back to therapy, and this time, I talked more. I told Dr. Ellis about the letter, about Mark, about the dreams. I told him how I felt, like I'd lost everything, like I didn't know who I was anymore. He listened, and then he said, "You're starting to see the cost of your choices. That's the first step. But now, you have to decide what kind of man you want to be." I didn't know the answer, not yet. But I knew I didn't want to be this man, the one who hurt Sarah, the one who pushed everyone away. I wanted to be better, but I didn't know how. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the empty chair where Sarah used to sit. I thought about her, about the life we'd had, about the life she was building now. I thought about the letter, about the dreams, about Dr. Ellis's words. I didn't know if I could fix this, but I knew I had to try. I just didn't know where to start. I kept going to therapy, week after week, even though it was hard. Dr. Ellis didn't let me hide, didn't let me make excuses. He'd ask me questions, tough ones, like, "Why did you think control would fix your pain?" Or, "What are you afraid of, Daniel?" I didn't always have answers, but I started to see things clearer. I'd hurt Sarah because I'd felt hurt, because I'd felt small. But hurting her didn't make me bigger. It just made me alone. I thought about her a lot, more than I wanted to admit. I'd sit in the living room, staring at the empty chair where she used to read, and wonder what she was doing. Was she happy? Was she free? I didn't know, and it ate at me. I wanted to call her, to ask, but I knew I couldn't. She'd said she was moving on, and I had to respect that, even if it hurt. The lawyer's letter still hung over me, but Sarah didn't push it. I got another letter, saying she wasn't pressing charges, but she wanted the divorce finalized. I signed the papers, my hands shaking, and mailed them back. It felt final, like a door closing, and I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to fight, to beg her to come back, but I knew it wouldn't work. I'd pushed her too far, and now she was gone. I tried to fix other things, though. I called Mark, left voicemails, saying I was sorry, but he didn't call back. I went to my parents' house, sat down with them, and told them everything. About therapy, about the guilt, about how I'd messed up. My mom cried, hugged me tight, and my dad just nodded, like he was proud I was trying. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. At work, I kept my head down, tried to rebuild my reputation. People still whispered, but I didn't fight it. I knew I'd earned it, and I had to live with it. I started talking to Tom again, my old buddy, and he listened, didn't judge. "You're doing the right thing, Dan," he said one night over beers. "It's going to take time, but you're trying." I wanted to believe him, but some days, it felt like I'd never get there. One night, I sat down with a pen and a piece of paper. I didn't know why, but I needed to write to Sarah. I started with "Dear Sarah," and then I just let it all out. I wrote about that night, about how I'd felt powerless, how I'd hurt her to feel in control. I wrote about therapy, about the dreams, about the guilt. I wrote about how sorry I was, how I wished I'd listened, how I hoped she was happy. It was messy, full of crossed-out words and shaky handwriting, but it was honest. When I finished, I read it over, my chest tight. I wanted to send it, to let her know I was trying, but I knew I couldn't. It wasn't fair to her. She'd moved on, and me sending a letter wouldn't change that. It wasn't for her, it was for me. So I folded it up, put it in a drawer, and left it there. It felt like letting go, like accepting that our paths were separate now. I kept going to therapy, kept trying to be better. Some days were good. I'd laugh with Tom, help my mom with groceries, feel like I was moving forward. Other days were hard. I'd see a couple holding hands, hear a song we used to love, and the guilt would hit me again. But I kept going, one step at a time. I didn't know what Sarah was doing, but I hoped she was okay. I pictured her in a new apartment, maybe with plants on the windowsill, laughing with her friends, working on her art. I hoped she was free, like she'd wanted to be. I hoped she didn't hate me, but I knew I couldn't control that. All I could control was me, and I was trying. That night, I sat in Dr. Ellis's office, staring at the clock. "I want to be better," I said, my voice quiet. "But I don't know if I'll ever get there." You're already on the way, he said, his voice steady. It's not about getting there. It's about keeping going. I nodded, my chest lighter than it had been in months. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I wasn't the man I'd been, and I didn't want to be. I was Daniel, flawed, trying, moving forward. And for now, that was enough. That's my story for now. It's not perfect, but it's mine. If it made you think, hit that like button, drop a comment, let me know. Subscribe for more stories like this, and share it if it hit home. We're all trying to figure it out, right? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.